Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Horalikova. I work in Aon Reinsurance Solutions. Aon is the largest insurance and reinsurance advisor and broker in the world. And it's my pleasure to be here today with you in Opatija. It's my first time here. And I would like to say special thanks to the organizers, to the Croatian Insurance Association for their kind invitation. Today I would like to present to you a short overview on the topic of the protection gap in case of large natural disasters. A protection gap is simply the difference between total economic damage and the insured losses which are paid by insurance companies, by the insurance community. And why is it important? Why do we think it's relevant for us today? Although we have heard this morning from very respected speakers how many challenges are coming on Croatian market, how many upcoming issues the insurance companies have to deal with. Still, we would like to pay attention to the topic of natural disasters. As we know, Croatia has been hit by two major earthquakes in a very recent history. Zagreb earthquake of March 2020 and followed by another devastating event later the same year in Petrinja. And as also my colleagues have mentioned before me, the protection gap in both cases have been outstandingly large, which means only small portion has been paid by insurance companies, and by far a majority of the damage has remained to be the burden of the state and effectively the burden of the taxpayers. In this context, I would like to mention three key issues when speaking about the protection gap. First of all, I would like to show you a summary of the reasons. Where does the protection gap come at all? Why does it appear? Second, I would like to show some statistics of how large this protection gap can be, speaking about different regions of the world, different insured perils. And finally, maybe most importantly, I would like to show you some practical examples of how we can deal with the protection gap and what has been done in some other countries of the world that could possibly serve as an inspiration to Croatian insurance market. So if I now come to the first topic of the reasons, why does the protection gap exist? We have outlined four different reasons, four groups of different reasons, while the, yes, it actually works. And well, the first one is something which is coming from the side of the clients, of the buyers of insurance protection. It's the low penetration. Simply, it is the case that consumers do not consider insurance to be very high on their list of priorities, and they decide not to buy the cover because they don't consider it affordable. And of course, in our opinion, I hope you will agree with me, this is the most relevant reason for us here in the region and in Croatia. And other sets of reasons, they come rather from the side of insurance companies. So it can be restrictive insurance terms when certain insured perils can be offered in a on a very limited basis in insurance policy. So the limits can be very low or deductibles can be very high. So effectively a very limited portion of the risk is carried by insurance company. We can show these examples in the neighboring countries to Croatia. For example, in Slovenia or in Austria, flood insurance is offered on a very limited basis, very sublimited, so in effect only small portion of the risk is then paid by insurance companies. Another reason that aversion of highly risky properties, it means that insurance companies may avoid certain properties located in very risky zones. For example, in Czech Republic, you will not insure a house which is standing directly at the river. And in some other countries here, you may also feel some restrictions when it comes to older buildings that are built with older seismic design codes. And finally, the last reason, possible gap in policy coverage. In some countries, it may even happen that certain insured perils are not included into the policy at all, simply because it was never perceived as an issue. So that one example was in Canada up until 2013. Flood was never a topic and it wasn't really a part of insurance coverage up until the flood has actually happened. If I now come to, to the second question, if we look worldwide, how large the protection gap can be, here is the statistics of all losses coming from natural disasters starting from the year 2000, so all the recent history of the 21st century. The gray area here is actually the portion of the losses that have not been insured. So this is our protection gap. And the blue part is the portion of the losses that has been paid by insurance companies. So we can see, obviously, from this chart that the protection gap worldwide is quite large. And if we look at the recent year, 2021, then we can see that 62% of all losses coming from natural disasters, they have not been insured. And that is quite significant in our opinion. And almost every year worldwide, the protection gap has been fluctuating around $100 billion, which is quite a lot. So if we now break down this picture into various macro regions of the world, and if we look separately at Europe, United States, and Asia, then we can see, of course, very large difference. And I would like to bring your attention to the curve which is representing United States, which is the dotted line. Here underneath, it's the lowest one. So the lowest protection gap we can see on the market of the United States, it fluctuates more or less around 50%, which still means that in the most developed, largest economy of the world, half of total losses remain uninsured. And that's quite astonishing if you think about it. And of course, the largest protection gap we can observe in Asian countries. This is this highest curve in Asia Pacific, and Europe is somewhere in the middle, but in case of Europe we can see a very high volatility, so the protection gap is jumping up and down quite substantially, and that is because we still have substantial differences between the countries. So depending on which country is affected, we can have a smaller or higher protection gap overall. That was if looking at the regions, and now if we try to break down the protection gap by different perils which are covered in the insurance policy, then again we have the two curves here at the bottom representing hail, convective storm, and windstorm affecting European countries. So those two perils reflect lowest protection gap, meaning majority of the losses or large part of the losses paid by insurance companies. And this is very simple to explain. That's because we are speaking about more developed economies. Convective storm and hail mostly impacts United States. This is where the largest losses come from, and the European windstorm, we are speaking about countries of Western Europe, where high insurance penetration leads to the fact that more losses are paid by insurance companies, less is retained by the state and by the taxpayers themselves. And critically high protection gap, it remains in the countries of Asia when it comes to drought and flood, while tropical cyclones, it really depends on which region is affected. If United States is affected, obviously more insurance, less gap, and if Asia is affected, then it's less insurance and higher protection gap. And obviously you might have seen that I do not have earthquake on this chart, and we all know that earthquake peril is the most relevant for Croatian market. This is because I wanted to show it separately to you when it comes to earthquake. And when we compare the largest earthquake events in the recent history worldwide, in Europe and also in the States and in Asia, then we can see quite a high protection gap in pretty much all of the cases. And in this instance, the difference between Italy or Albania or Croatia are not high at all. We can see that 90% or more has been not insured. And that is, again, quite a high number. However, we can see this very interesting exception from the case. Yes, here that's this 18% from New Zealand. That's quite astonishing and clearly an exception to the rule. And this brings me to the third question of my short overview, which is what can we do about the protection gap? What are the possible practical solutions? And one of a very good example of how the protection gap is being solved or has been solved is New Zealand, where an earthquake pool was established back in 1945, and that was only 3 years after two major earthquakes have hit the country in 1942. So in essence, it's a very similar situation of where we are today in Croatia. It's just very recently after 2 disastrous events. The earthquake pool was established through the cooperation of the state and of the insurance companies. It has been put into a very severe test in 2011, when thousands of various shocks, seismic shocks, have affected South Island of the New Zealand, altogether generating almost 500,000 of various insured claims. Thanks to the fact that the insurance earthquake pool has already existed for decades, it has been well prepared. The market penetration in the household sector by 2011 has reached 95%. And therefore, we can see quite an amazingly low protection gap in case of New Zealand. We can see that out of the total economic damage of $24 billion, almost 20 billion was actually paid by insurance companies. And the earthquake protection pool is buying a reinsurance contract, so a very large portion of these funds, they have actually come through reinsurance capacity and have been paid by reinsurance in a very timely and effective manner. And I'm proud to say that Aon is the sole advisor and placing broker for the New Zealand earthquake pool and has been in that role for decades. And my second and the last practical example of how can we possibly deal with the protection gap is the topic of flood in the United Kingdom, where a special solution, in-house internal market reinsurance company called Flood Re was set up to provide a temporary coverage for those households who would not be able to afford commercially priced, adequately priced flood insurance. Those are the houses located close to the river, in flood zones. If such households asked for a quote from insurance company, the quote would have been very expensive and they would simply decide not to buy the coverage. So a temporary solution was put in place. It is now has to be in place until 2039, and it's actually partially sponsored by the state, partially sponsored by insurance companies. Flood insurance is offered at an affordable rate, and at the same time, the purpose of this organization is to prepare those households for the transition to the real insurance market, so that eventually they actually started paying real insurance price. But it's impossible to do that overnight. It's impossible to do it very fast. Therefore, such a transitional mechanism exists. And with those two practical examples, I would like to finish my presentation. At the end, I would only like to say that we at Aon would be very happy to assist Croatian insurance market, insurance companies, as well as government institutions in all possible discussions on the ideas, solutions of design of the insured products and of the whole system. Thanks to our technical knowledge, modeling capabilities, we have developed in-house the only probabilistic earthquake model for Croatia, and our clients, insurance companies in Croatia, are already using it, as well as thanks to our market knowledge. We are the sole advisor to quite major pools in Europe and worldwide, and we are an advisor to those markets and countries where there is no earthquake pool yet, but there are various discussions and understanding of the need that some solution needs to be put in place, like Greece, Bulgaria, and Albania. So that was my short overview for today. I hope that sets a good scene for the upcoming panel discussion, and I would like to thank you for your attention. Hvala vama na pažnji.